Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 22nd episode of the iGaming Show presented by Paramount Commerce. I'm your host, Varad Mehta, and in this podcast, we analyze gaming industry trends with experts from various gaming organizations. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the key strategies in tackling risks and ensuring compliance in a growing iGaming market with Ian Messenger, the CEO of the Association of Certified Gaming Compliance Specialists. So, without further ado, let's get the show rolling.
So Ian, how we always begin this podcast is by asking our guests a few fun questions. So I have a couple lined up for you. The first one is, what is your number one tip for taking a fantastic portrait photo?
That's a very good question. My number one tip for taking a fantastic portrait is to be comfortable. To be comfortable in yourself. Be relaxed. Don't take it too seriously. No one ever takes a great photo the first time or the second time.
Love it, love it. My next question is that you're a professor, but you were also a student once. So how did you learn the best? Were you a visual learner, or were you an independent reading type of learner? And did you kind of incorporate that into your teaching way as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was very much a visual learner, really by not just seeing, but by doing as well. I wasn't really one for reading, pages on the textbook. It was very much doing by example, and that's really what I had a career in policing and then in compliance in the gaming sector, and it's not something you could learn from a textbook, and that's really kind of informed my teaching practice, and the work we do in the CGCS is very much to be visual and practical.
Love it. And my last question would be, what is the process of putting together a book? Like, how much work goes into putting together a book? Because you're an author of many books. So what is that process like?
A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of focus, a lot of time, a lot of proofreading. I think with each of the books, think about who you're writing for, who your audience is, and what value you want them to take away from this book. Because whether it's a book or a certification or a training, you are taking someone's time. You're asking someone to commit to reading 400 pages or going through a course. It's got to be mutually beneficial. So a lot of focusing on the audience and then creating the content, refining it, redrafting, and then looking for all those spelling and grammar mistakes.
I love that. I love that. And Ian just mentioned he has so many different skill sets that you can potentially ask him about anything and you'll get like a perfect expert answer. So I love this. But going into the topic of discussion that we're here to talk about, financial risks and compliance, something that is an important topic within the iGaming space and that we need to speak about. So my first question for you, Ian, would be, you recently led a workshop for the Council of Europe in Armenia on the financial risks of iGaming. So could you share some insights that were really or could be relevant to Canadian iGaming operators today?
Sure. And as I work in many different countries and jurisdictions, there's a lot of there's a lot of commonalities, whether it's in Armenia or whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's in the US or even here at home in Canada. There's a lot of consistent risks, and this is really, we'll talk later about collaboration and communication. I mean, this is really where although we are a global industry, where we all have the same risks. Thinking about how the Armenian situation relates to Canada, one of the significant challenges with iGaming is the non-face-to-face nature. We don't get to see who our clients are. We're not a brick and mortar casino where we can pick up on those non-verbal, non-visual clues. We're really going off data and what information is being provided to us. And this is really becoming an issue in the world, in the realm of AI. We've seen this year, for example, ChatGTP can create synthetic passports, synthetic driver license documents, which have been fooling many of the ID verification systems that we use. It probably hasn't gone unnoticed that the world is a much more volatile place than it was a number of years ago. So one of the significant risks in iGaming is sanctions risk. You know, who are the customers we're dealing with? Do we have any sanctions exposure? I remember my working in industry here in Canada. I remember when the war in Ukraine started, and overnight there was 500 new individuals on the sanctions list. Our colleagues in Armenia, very much the same thing. Indeed, a few months earlier, I was doing Council of Europe training in Ukraine and seeing the challenges they faced, money laundering, terrorism financing, all while dealing with this non-face-to-face interaction.
No, that's an interesting one. You provided some great examples there of certain financial risks that are involved within iGaming. Can you perhaps even share what other specific vulnerabilities you see within the Canadian space currently, and how operators can address them?
Yeah. So in Ontario, we are a very innovative market. We are a very young market as well, and we're growing each year. I mean, we've just seen the iGaming on Ontario results recently. The revenue, gameplay is increasing, but we are a relatively young organization, young jurisdiction. We still have a pretty active unregulated market. So the interplay between the unregulated sector and the regulated sector, the movement of funds between them, the wide competition that we have. And one of the real challenges iGaming operators have is that in the face of competition, one of the areas that often gets reduced or gets minimized or gets listed as a cost saving is compliance. And that can be a real challenge, not just from a regulatory compliance, from your licensing or your audits from the AGCO, but knowing your customers and knowing the risks that you actually face. And we haven't even talked about fraud yet.
For sure. And as you mentioned that, the face-to-face doesn't kind of exist anymore within this new kind of, iGaming space. So stuff like KYC and sanctions screenings are becoming really important. Now, you mentioned compliance there for a second, but how can iGaming operators in Canada and in a market like Ontario ensure that they are meeting and exceeding compliance standards?
Yeah. So this idea of meeting and exceeding, I'm a big advocate of exceeding where it's appropriate. And by exceeding, that doesn't mean that we have to spend outrageous amounts of dollars. We don't have to invest in complex or convoluted processes. It's working smarter, not harder. And you mentioned KYC. We talked about sanctions lists. I'm a big advocate of having compliance staff who have a good understanding of what's going on in the world, so having a good worldview. This can help us to understand our customers, understand some of the geographic risks, some of the cultural factors that they may bring, and combining this with open source research. So whilst we have KYC, whilst we have documents that have been supplied by the patron, well, doing our own research, having our open source research skills, being able to verify or disprove what's being told can be really effective. So this year, I'm on a big push as we are here at the CGCS to really push the idea of open source research as not an optional skill, but as a requirement for any compliance officer in Ontario and indeed worldwide.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there about if you're combating financial crime or financial risk within this specific industry, it has to do with collaboration between a lot of people, whether it's operators, whether it's regulators or other stakeholders. So how can iGaming operators build a strong network to share intelligence and best practices or their tools, what resources they could do?
Sure thing. And it's a simple answer, although it's a commercially difficult one, but it's a simple answer. Conversation, building relationships. One of the biggest obstacles, and I've been studying, I've been teaching in the world of collaboration and partnership working for too many decades now. But one of the biggest hurdles is not being willing to share your own experiences, your own information. We often find that in iGaming, and indeed in the casino industry and more broadly, financials in the financial sector as well, there's this, we often think about commercially sensitive information. You know, we can't talk about a risk or a vulnerability that we're facing, because if we talk about it, it exists. And then our competitors hear about this, that gives them an advantage. Where in reality, each operator is probably experiencing the exact same risk, the exact same challenge. And some operators will have tried certain processes, certain practices to combat that. Some may have worked, some may not. But imagine how much more effective it is if we were able to share what works, what doesn't work in a collaborative space. Because one of the biggest risks that we have in a multi-operator environment like Ontario or any jurisdiction is that we simply move the problem or the problem patron from one operator to the other. We as an operator identify that we have a problem with a patron or a customer, so we demarket them. They go next door, or the virtual next door, to the next operator with a complete clean slate. So having communication work, you know, having those relationships, and that's something I don't think we have yet in Ontario. We don't have that forum where operators can come, where compliance staff even can come together and perhaps in a Chatham House type forum be able to share their challenges, their issues in a non-commercially challenging way. Just recently, in the CGCS, for example, we had a series of webinars where we invited the AGCO, the OPP, and operators together, and we talked about how collaboration is not just between operators, but it's between everyone in the ecosystem. You know, an operator has certain information, law enforcement has other information, the regulator has other information. Imagine if we all got around the table and each brought our pieces of the puzzle together, and it's a conversation.
For sure. Do you expect that sort of approach to soften and people would be a little bit more open to sharing these things? What would be your best approach in getting that conversation started?
Well, here in Canada, I think it's coffee and donuts. And that's always an effective conversation starter. But I think, you know, with some of the recent FinTrack changes, finally after a long time, and whether it's because FATF are coming this year, I'm not too sure. I have my own opinion on that. But having the mechanisms to engage in public-private partnerships, I think, you know, in countries like the UK and in other European jurisdictions, sharing of information of private information between private operators and government bodies is much easier than it is here in Canada. We have very stringent privacy regulation. We have the Charter, of course, and if we look at those two things, there's nothing that says we can't share private information. It's just, you know, how do we do it? And there's a reluctance, I think, by legal and compliance to be the first operator out of the gate to do this. We've seen great successes, I think, in the financial sector with banks and other financial institutions collaborating, sharing thematic information, sharing risks, where, again, going above and beyond what was required by the legislation, but doing the right thing and strengthening the sector as a whole.
For sure. Ian, then can you explain what open source intelligence is and how can Canadian operators leverage this tool more effectively into their compliance and risk management strategies?
Sure. So, you know, we live a lot a lot of our life online, don't we? We all have social media accounts. We all have Reddit accounts. We all have some digital footprint out there. Now, it's very basic. An open source intelligence search could be putting the patron's name into Google and seeing what comes back. And you'd be surprised. You take your patron's name and you add the word crime into your Google search, and maybe you come back with a press release from a police service saying that your patron's been charged with money laundering or a predicate offense. Perhaps you come across a social media account that shows a certain lifestyle. Does that match up with the KYC information that's being provided? Perhaps you search their name and they come up on a government sanctions list. Well, that's interesting, I would say. But really, when we talk about open source intelligence, open source research, it's really anything that's out there that's publicly available. And there are hundreds and thousands of different websites and digital spaces where we live. Now, it's up to the compliance officer to make that assessment. Which platforms do we need to search? What search terms do we need to use? What makes sense? Again, going back to judgment, but essentially we're looking for information that is in the public domain, which goes above and beyond what the client or the patron has provided to us. Because sometimes patrons don't tell us the whole truth. Most of them may, but some don't.
So basically tells the whole story about who might be signing up for a specific account, and it's based on tools that are based on data or information that's already kind of out there.
Yeah, it's not it's basically adding more context to what we know about the individual. What type of lifestyle does our individual have? Do we have adverse media, for example? Adverse media is the term we use when we find results that are negative. If for example, our patron's name appears in a police report or in a press release, or perhaps there's a Reddit thread. I've seen this before where a particular patron was being discussed at length for being involved in mortgage fraud. Well, once we start seeing large sums of money coming in to the iGaming operator from someone that has these public allegations, that might make us want to rethink our risk assessment.
That's fascinating. And Ian, my last question for you would be that as the iGaming industry kind of changes within Canada, with more provinces opening up, as even Ontario leading the charge, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges and even opportunities for Canadian operators in the next year or so when it comes to tackling financial risks or setting good compliance standards?
I think if we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even 100 days ago now, my answer would be very different. If we think about Ontario, whilst it is the most populous gaming province, we have a lot of operators, a lot of competition. So every dollar counts. Compliance is not always cheap. So over the next 12, 24 months, as we look forward into potentially trade wars and challenges, both from an operator and a patron perspective, we're going to have operators who potentially may feel the effects of lower revenue as a result of discretionary spending being cut back. What can be cut from compliance, for example? Often not too much, because we have a lot of mandatory requirements. But also from a patron side, I mean, we've always had risky patrons, risky customers. The customers who come to our platforms wanting to engage in fraud or money laundering or other types of financial crimes. Well, we know that when there's times of economic hardship, when there's recession, when there's job losses, when there's financial pressures, well, the iGaming space provides a number of opportunities for individuals to exploit the system. So what I mean by that is that over the next 2 years, as we enter this unknown with our neighbor south of the border, and the consequences of that, we're going to have robust compliance systems in our iGaming operators. We're going to have to know our customers very well, but also monitor for changes. Because if we just think about the last 100 days of what's been going on in the US, we see changing environments day by day. Over the next year or 2 years, those uncertainties will also impact our customers. So let's say, for example, this week we know that our customer is employed, they have a certain income, they have a certain recreational gaming behavior. Maybe next week or next month they lose their job, and the job market tightens, and things become financially difficult, and we see their gaming behavior move from entertainment to focusing on trying to fill that gap that they had with wages. So monitoring not just for abuses, but also responsible gaming and player protection as well, because we're going to be entering a very pressurized, a very uncertain environment, and the idea of easy money, of quick wins, fast cash. While the iGaming space and our land-based colleagues, there's still that undercurrent that might appeal to certain individuals.
Oh, for sure, and that's such a fascinating way that you described that. That's amazing. Ian, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and providing your expertise on this topic, combating financial risk. There's so many factors, even like the one that you just mentioned about the uncertainty of current times, whether it comes to politics or anything else. And I'm really appreciate that you shared your expertise and provided some great insights on this specific topic. And for the listeners, if you want some photograph or any other kind of tips, Ian is your man to message on LinkedIn or wherever you can find him. But thank you so much again. Thank you, Ian, for joining us today.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
In a growing iGaming market, strategies such as KYC, sanction screenings, and open source intelligence not only help in reducing risks, but also in ensuring compliance. I want to thank our guest for today, Ian Messenger, the CEO of the Association of Certified Gaming Compliance Specialists, for joining us today and providing his expertise. If you have any questions for us or Ian, then please do comment them down below. Please don't forget to like and share this episode, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the episode transcript and more content, please visit our website at ParamountCommerce.com. Thank you so much for tuning into the iGaming show presented by Paramount Commerce. I'm your host, Varad Mehta, and until next time, keep gaming.